Medusa has always been portrayed as the ultimate monster, a snake-haired monster with a lethal gaze, existing solely as the final boss for a hero to conquer. That's the narrative history has force-fed us for centuries. But have you ever noticed a glaring flaw that we just swallow without question? Why is Perseus always crowned the righteous hero, while a traumatized, forcibly exiled woman is painted as the villain? What if, for thousands of years, we've been worshipping the wrong person? To dissect this historical anomaly, we have to peel back the layers of the monster's true identity. The version we'll be exploring comes from the Roman poet Ovid, who gave Medusa her tragic backstory. In Ovid's ancient literature, Medusa wasn't spawned from hell. She was born immortal, a girl of extraordinary beauty who chose a quiet life. She dedicated her entire life in purity as a priestess in the sacred temple of the goddess Athena. To Medusa, the temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was her sanctuary from a harsh outside world. Behind those cold marble pillars, she found warmth, purpose, and absolute safety. However, the beauty that should have been a blessing became the catalyst for her destruction. Poseidon, the god of the sea, noticed her. With the absolute arrogance of power, Poseidon forced his way into that most sacred space. He violated Medusa right there on the temple floor, the very floor she lovingly cleaned every single day. As a mortal, Medusa was powerless. Amidst her tears and despair, she must have desperately hoped that Athena would descend from Olympus, defend her, and punish Poseidon. But historical reality always sides with those in power. Athena was furious that her temple was defiled, but Poseidon was a major deity with far too much political weight to challenge. So who did Athena end up punishing? That's right, Medusa. Now, let's think about this. Why would ancient people create a story about a goddess who punishes the victim? This is where the ancient myth shifts into a metaphorical psychological study. One way to interpret this myth is as one of the oldest reflections of humanity's worst habit, always blaming the weakest link. It is incredibly easy for a corrupt system to crush those who are already powerless, rather than demanding justice from a tyrannical ruler. The victim has to be transformed into a monster, so society has a logical reason to hate her without feeling guilty. And let's talk about the curse. Athena's curse wasn't just physical disfigurement. This punishment was a masterpiece of psychological torture. Athena cursed her eyes. Anyone who met Medusa's gaze would turn to stone. Medusa was forced to realize that for the rest of her life, she would never again look into the eyes of someone who loved her. No hugs, no connection. She was forced to exile herself to the edge of the world, bearing the trauma of her past entirely alone in eternal isolation. As years passed in exile, Medusa's loneliness slowly birthed a dark legend. Rumors of a snake-haired monster at the edge of the world spread across Greece. Hearing this, glory-hungry warriors began to arrive. They wanted to make a name for themselves by trying to conquer the beast. But one by one they failed, ending up as frozen pillars of stone. Looking at this string of deaths, it's completely fair if you start arguing, wait a minute, doesn't that prove Medusa actually was a ruthless, murderous monster? Let's break the situation down with fair logic. First, Medusa never left her cave to hunt humans. She never terrorized cities. It was these men who flocked to invade her hiding place for their own ambition and greed. Second, her gaze wasn't some magic weapon she could control. It was a curse that tormented her. If a group of armed men broke into your house and you were forced to defend yourself, does that make you the bad guy? Ultimately, this highlights a painfully cliché sociological reality, that the most terrifying monsters or villains are often born from good people who were hurt too deeply by their world. Right in the middle of this graveyard of stone warriors enters Perseus. As observers of history, we need to look at Perseus objectively. He didn't just drop out of the sky, and we can't label him as purely evil. Perseus carried his own psychological baggage. He was just a young man caught in dirty political intrigue. A tyrannical king named Polydectes wanted to marry Perseus's mother. To get rid of her fiercely protective son, the king set him up on a suicide mission, bring back the head of Medusa. In this context, Perseus had a very human and justifiable motive. He just wanted to protect his mom. However, this story demands that we look at the bigger picture. The real tragedy lies in how the power system exploited Perseus's desperation. Athena and the Olympian gods, the very ones who ruined Medusa's life in the first place, saw Perseus as the perfect pawn to do their dirty work. They armed this desperate kid with god-tier weaponry, a magical sword, flying sandals, and a mirrored shield. With the absolute backing of the Olympian elite, Perseus arrived at Medusa's lair. And let's look at how history frames the final moments of the monster. This wasn't an epic battle between good and evil, it was an execution. Perseus snuck through the darkness, hiding behind his shield because he didn't dare look his victim in the eye, and ended the life of a woman who was fast asleep. The true tragedy of this myth isn't about a holy hero defeating a demon. The ones at fault from the very beginning were Poseidon, with his destructive arrogance, and Athena, who cowardly took her anger out on the weakest link. Medusa and Perseus weren't fighting for the greater good. They were both just tragic pawns, manipulated and pitted against each other by a broken, corrupt system. Maybe. When that bronze sword finally ended her life, Medusa didn't feel defeated at all. For a soul betrayed by her gods, isolated from civilization, and hated by the entire world, death wasn't a threat. It was a ticket home. A quiet way out, transporting her memory back to a peaceful morning in Athena's temple, long before a cruel world broke her. This ancient tale has survived for millennia to remind us of one bitter truth. When we choose to turn a blind eye to the sins of those in power and instead punish the powerless, we are the ones actually creating monsters. Yet Medusa is still remembered as the villain. So, after seeing this truth, who do you think deserves to be called the real monster?